Okay, just a couple of things that I'd like to mention first of all. We've just seen the inflation figures, of course, for the March quarter, up 4.5%. That's really going to stretch so many people who are low and middle income earners. It will not be compensated for by the tax cuts. Those on high incomes, of course, will be fine. But it's interesting to see where the inflation has hit. It's hit on necessities that cannot be avoided by people on low and middle incomes. And it's hit most particularly on education. The costs in the last year for early childhood education up 12%. That is directly the consequence of government actions. And the inflation at the level that it is now, yes, partly influenced by international commodity prices, but also critically influenced by the rise in GST. This will put families under pressure. This is not a lifestyle choice, as John Key has said, for people. These are basic necessities. Secondly, I'd like to foreshadow a speech that I'm giving this afternoon in Christchurch to the Manufacturers and Exporters Association. I'll be focused particularly on what I see as a looming crisis and skill shortage. We know that the amount of building work in this country will double in the next 12 to 18 months, and that will require double the number of people who have those skills. At the moment, those building trades are going backwards. Apprenticeship intakes are down by 30%, skill training almost halved. And yet we will see over the next 12 to 18 months a critical shortage that will slow the recovery in Christchurch and will also force up prices. The cost of rebuilding Christchurch will be much higher because of that. When I asked the person in charge of the new SERA organisation and the industry in Christchurch last week what skill training programs were in place, the answer was none. That simply is not good enough.
How do you control the price of petrol there? Because that's, under the inflation figures, almost 20%. Petrol's got almost 20%. How do you control that, or is that just part of life?
Well, 3 years ago to this month, John Key stood up in Parliament and asked Helen Clark what she was doing about petrol and dairy prices. Apparently he had the answer then, but the answer is now eluding him.
Do you accept that politicians can't do anything about petrol prices?
Oh, John Key claimed that he could 3 years ago to this month. So now he's saying there's nothing he can do about it. On one occasion he wasn't telling the truth.
But then could you do anything about it? I think that's a question.
Oh, I think you can do something about it, and it's this. There couldn't have been a worse time to bring in the extra GST than when prices are already going through the roof. 2.2% of the rise in prices is directly as a result of the government's decision on GST. They made a decision to raise GST when they promised not to. And if you look additionally to that, the 12% rise in education costs for early childhood education, again, directly the consequence of government actions.
Would you take GST off petrol? Would you take GST off petrol?
No, we won't be doing that. And John Key may have promised that he could do something about dairy and petrol prices, and he has done something about it. He's pushed them up still further through that element of the cost that is the result of higher GST. That is John Key's responsibility.
Would you take GST back to the 12.5% it was?
Well, you know that that would cost the country $3 billion that we don't have. John Key was prepared to push up prices and compensate those on highest incomes but not low and middle incomes. What we need to do is to help low and middle income earners through things like the whole of the GST off fresh fruit and vegetables and the first $100 a week tax free.
How close to you are you to releasing your policy, which would include how you get that money from the higher income earners?
We're working through our taxation and our savings policies at the moment, but as usual, those will be released quite close to the election, not months in advance.
Do you think there are any savings to be made from KiwiSaver by reducing any of those elements?
Well, the government was claiming that it wanted people to save more. KiwiSaver was a brilliant scheme introduced by the last Labor government. It's got more than 1.2 million savers in it, and so too was the superannuation fund, a return of around 8% on $19 billion at the moment. That's great, But both of those funds have been cut back by this government. That will reduce, not increase savings.
Could you fully restore the current fund again, or is that still a...
Well, I think that's part of the saving policy that we're working on. Couldn't be done overnight, but clearly having a scheme that meets the cost of the baby boomers as they retire is essential if the whole burden of superannuation is not to be met by the younger generation coming through without the prospect of them being able to enjoy the same advantages.